In 2019, a Deloitte survey asked millennials around the world one simple question. Do you feel like your life is turning out the way you expected? More than half said no. Not because they hadn't worked hard enough, not because they weren't smart enough, but because somewhere between the "you can be anything you want" of their childhood and the reality of student debt, unstable jobs, housing markets they can't enter, and a climate they didn't create, something broke. And what broke wasn't their ambition. What broke was the psychological contract they were handed at birth. Generation Y is the most studied generation in modern history. More research, more think pieces, more hot takes than any generation before them. And yet, the actual psychology of why they think the way they do, why they struggle the way they do, and why they can't seem to just get over it the way everyone keeps telling them to. That part never gets explained properly. Until now. And if you're a millennial watching this, or if you love one, I want to say something clearly before we go any further. The exhaustion is real. The confusion is real. The feeling that you did everything right and somehow still ended up behind, that's not a character flaw. That's a psychological response to a very specific set of conditions, and you're not imagining it. Here's what those conditions actually looked like. Millennials grew up in the era of structured childhood. Soccer practice, piano lessons, scheduled playdates, parents at every game with cameras. For the first time in American history, a generation was raised with the message, "You are special, you are watched, you are applauded." Participation trophies weren't just a joke, they were a signal. Your presence alone is enough to be celebrated. Then they graduated. Into the 2008 financial crisis, into a job market that didn't care how special their kindergarten teacher said they were, into student loan debt that averaged $37,000 and climbing, into a housing market that priced them out before they even started. Think about the 34-year-old with a master's degree working a job that didn't exist when she started college, overthinking every career decision because nothing looks like what she was told it would look like. Or the 38-year-old who did everything right, good grades, good school, good attitude, and still can't figure out why it doesn't feel like enough. The problem isn't that millennials are lazy or entitled. The problem is that their psychological software was written for a world that changed the rules halfway through the game. And when the world stops matching the map in your head, your nervous system doesn't just shrug and update. It panics, quietly, constantly. So what's actually happening inside the millennial brain? Here's where it gets genuinely fascinating. Your brain builds its core identity framework during childhood and adolescence, specifically around one central question: am I enough? For most generations, that question got answered through struggle, failure, and gradual earned confidence. You fell off the bike, you got back on. Your brain logged, "I can handle hard things." But here's what researchers at Stanford studying motivation and praise discovered, and this reframes everything. When children are consistently praised for who they are rather than what they do, their brains develop what psychologists call a fixed performance identity. What that means for you is this: their sense of self becomes dependent on external validation rather than internal evidence. Be honest, does that sound familiar? The participation trophy generation didn't become entitled, they became contingently confident, capable and ambitious, but with a nervous system that still looks outward to confirm it's doing okay. And then loss aversion kicks in. A brain wired to need external validation treats the absence of praise the same way it treats an actual threat.
That's why a single piece of critical feedback at work can undo a week of good performance in one afternoon. That's not weakness, that's a nervous system running exactly the program it was given.
So, what do you actually do with this? I know it's coming. Great, so my childhood is the reason for everything. Very helpful. Stay with me, because understanding the program is the first step to choosing when to run it and when to update it. Technique 1. Internal validation anchoring. Self-determination theory, Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, University of Rochester. Why it works? Self-determination theory shows that sustainable motivation and genuine confidence come from internal sources, autonomy, competence, and relatedness, not from likes, performance reviews, or external benchmarks. When millennials learn to anchor their sense of self to internal evidence rather than external signals, the contingent confidence loop begins to break. At work, at the end of each day, write down one thing you did that you are proud of, independent of whether anyone noticed or acknowledged it. Not what got praised, what felt genuinely good to you. You're training your brain to generate its own signal. At home, when you catch yourself measuring your life against someone else's Instagram, ask one question. Is this actually what I want, or is this what I think I'm supposed to want? The gap between those two answers is where your real values live. Technique 2. Cognitive diffusion, acceptance and commitment therapy, Stephen Hayes. Why it works? Millennials are, statistically, the most anxious generation in modern American history, partly because their brains were trained to treat uncertainty as failure. Cognitive diffusion teaches the brain to observe its own thoughts without being controlled by them. You see the thought, you don't become it. At work, when the thought, "I'm behind where I should be," shows up, and it will, try labeling it out loud. I'm having the thought that I'm behind where I should be. That single grammatical shift creates enough distance for your prefrontal cortex to re-engage instead of your nervous system taking over. At home, when comparison anxiety hits, scrolling through someone's highlight reel and feeling the familiar drop, say it plainly. I'm having the thought that their life is better than mine. You're not suppressing it, you're seeing it clearly for the first time, and clarity is the beginning of choice. Technique 3. Psychological flexibility training, ACT framework, clinical research, Association for Contextual Behavioral Science. Why it works? The millennial brain was trained on certainty. There's a right answer, a right path, a right timeline. Psychological flexibility is the ability to hold uncertainty without it triggering a threat response. Research shows it's one of the strongest predictors of long-term well-being across all demographics, and it's a skill, not a personality trait. It can be built. At work, deliberately take on one project per month where the outcome is genuinely uncertain, where you might fail, where there's no guaranteed applause at the end. You're giving your nervous system controlled exposure to uncertainty so it stops treating ambiguity as an emergency. In relationships, practice stating a need directly, once, without softening it into invisibility. I need more reassurance in this relationship is a complete sentence. You don't have to earn the right to need things. You just have to practice saying them. The goal isn't to stop caring what people think. The goal is to stop needing their verdict before you can trust your own.
Here is what I want Generation Y to actually hear. You weren't naive for believing the promise. You were children. Children believe what adults tell them. That's not a flaw. That's how brains are supposed to work. You weren't weak for struggling when the world didn't match the map. You were running a program designed for a reality that quietly disappeared while you were still inside it. You weren't too sensitive. You weren't too ambitious. You weren't too much. You were a generation handed an impossible standard and then criticized for not meeting it. Now you know what was actually happening, And knowing, really knowing, at the level of your nervous system changes what's possible next.